In the same way as South Africans think their problems are unique, they tend to think our Truth Commission is also unique. In fact, there have been at least 8 Truth Commissions in recent years in places like Uganda, El Salvador, Argentina, Chile, Haiti, Chad, and Sri Lanka. Still, South Africa's Truth Commission is the biggest and most far-reaching one so far. It has had the effect that many nations who had come through times of repression and turmoil are now looking at establishing Truth Commissions with our commission as a model. The former Dutch colony in South America, Suriname, is about to launch a Truth Commission, and there's debate in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda around the same issue. Probably the most prominent expert on Truth Commissions worldwide is a young American academic and researcher, Priscilla Hayner.
If you look at some of the more prominent examples of these kinds of Truth Commissions in Latin America, for example, you have both examples where commissions were set up through presidential decree in Chile and Argentina, both. And one thing about that model is that because they were set up through a presidential decree and not through national legislation, they weren't able to take on certain powers, such as the power to subpoena, which has become so important to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here. But they only had powers to invite people, either perpetrators or victims or families of the disappeared, to come forward and give testimony. Unfortunately, in both Chile and Argentina, they primarily took evidence from families of the victims and not from perpetrators. They had almost no collaboration from perpetrators, which is strikingly different from South Africa. This is really the only case, because of the amnesty model that has been set up here, where in exchange for the truth, amnesty might be granted. So because of that, there has been a reason for perpetrators to come forward and tell the exact truth about what they did. And people often say, why don't we have trials instead? And it's not an either-or, actually. There's examples such as in Argentina where the Commission on the Disappeared, when it closed its doors, it handed its files directly to the prosecutor's office. And that led to the trial of the leadership of the military regime and put a few persons in jail. And that came directly from the information from the Commission, for example. Even if you look at South Africa, some trials certainly would have been possible. I think it's already been clear as to the limitations that those trials would confront, and those that we have seen here. But in addition to that, there's a certain amount of truth that comes from a trial, and it certainly isn't the full truth. It can't be the broad truth. You can't cover 35 years of repression. You can't look at the systematic nature of violations behind, be it apartheid, for example.
Our Truth Commission here is very different because we have television cameras recording every single moment and radio microphones, and it's broadcast on a daily basis. Does that, in your experience, make a big difference?
It's absolutely remarkable to me to watch the process here. I mean, it's so much so that I would say most other commissions are a commission about a product, and the commission in South Africa is a commission about a process. And it's the process that will affect the country, that is affecting the country. Presumably the report that's produced as well will be important. It's obviously still in process, and we'll see that. But in other countries, people know very little from the outside about what's happening. Nothing's public. Often there's a very strict rule of confidentiality that even the staff can't speak to the press. No one knows even what cases might be investigated. And the journalism sector is usually much more limited, constrained, often threatened themselves if they're coming out of a very dark history, so that there's not the investigative journalism context that prompts other investigations to go on, for example, within the commission.
We have a feeling here that this is the mother of all truth commissions, and this will be the model from now on. Do you agree?
It is definitely the model that everybody is looking to. And I think in part because of the great attention and great interest in the commission here, there has been sparked an interest in doing something similar elsewhere. And those commissions that are being spoken about in other countries, and they're cropping up all over, it seems, often refer to the South African case as what they want to do in their country. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a model that can be recreated, and probably shouldn't be. As I said, each commission is different, and each commission should be different. It should be as strong as it can be in the political context in which it operates. But there will be different aspects of its mandate which might need to be stronger or weaker. Now, some of the distinctions about the South African Commission, such as the amnesty provision, such as the power to subpoena persons, other kinds of powers, fairly strong powers it's been given, such as search and seizure to collect evidence, those have never been seen before, surprisingly, because they're such an important part of the commission here. It's hard to think of a truth commission without them. But those are actually unique, and they've captured much attention from persons overseas. Now, if you look to Bosnia, if you look to Rwanda, two good examples. Both countries, of course, have an international tribunal, which are trying some of their criminals from past conflicts. Both countries have not had truth commissions, but both independently are now thinking of putting together truth commissions, which is a surprise to me, but I think that says many things. I think it says something about the limitations that people are seeing in taking a trials approach only. It also says that it's not an either-or. You can have trials, domestic and international tribunal trials, and you can also have a commission that can paint the big picture and give much more voice to and listen to the victims. If you look at Rwanda specifically, they specifically decided against a truth commission. And after their period of genocide, they decided to have domestic trials as well as support the International Tribunal. Now, they have, as of about 3 weeks ago, 105,000 persons in jail from the genocide period. There have been 250 trials that have started. And that's pushing about as hard as can be pushed from the UN and other organizations that are trying to facilitate trials. It just is a very slow process.
Can a truth commission be an effective instrument to extract the truth about the past?
That depends on what powers the commission is given. In some cases, there is great frustration. You can have a commission that's very effective, but in the end, it really only has the powers to speak to victims or speak to surviving family members. And I remember speaking with one mother in Chile who had gone to the commission, and she had always been very active in trying to find the remains of her loved one who had gone missing. And in the end, when the report came out, the report stated, this woman's husband was disappeared on this date and he has been found to be a victim of human rights violations. But she already knew that. She got no further truth from that case. She already knew exactly what the commission wrote because essentially they got the information from her and they corroborated that. However, the greater society of Chile probably did not fully understand the extent of the disappearances, and for them it was critically important to see that. The extent and the depth of denial in Chile, as in many other countries, was so great that up into the mid to late 1980s, which was 15 years after the military coup, 15 years after most of the violations had taken place, there was still blanket denial from the government.
What we see here, especially from white people, is an attitude of, why is it necessary to rake up the past? We want to know about the past. It's about reconciliation. Let's take hands and go into the future.
I think that it's a universal that the people that are least served or somehow threatened by the truth are not interested in that truth coming out, even if it's maybe several steps removed.